Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. My name's Dr. Jon Radwan, and I direct the Institute for Communication and Religion here in Seton Hall University's College of Human Development, Culture, and Media. Today, I'm happy to host a conversation with Msgr Dick Liddy, one of Seton Hall's most committed educators and a wonderful senior colleague and leader. Our main goal today is to gather and document oral history about SHU and the people who make this a very special place. But before we get historical, Msgr Liddy is writing a new book, tentatively called Lead Kindly Light, Lonergan on Newman. John Henry Newman was recently sainted, and Bernard Lonergan was a very influential 20th century theologian. Dick, it's really great to be with you. Welcome. Can you please start us off by telling us a little bit about Newman, Lonergan, and your new book?
Great, John. Thank you very much. It's great to be here with you. And Newman, of course, was a 19th century Anglican priest who became a Roman Catholic in 1845, and then he wrote some classic books. One was The Idea of a University, and the other was the Apologia Pro Vita Sua, sort of the story of his own life. And Father Lonergan was my teacher in Rome many years ago. He lived in the 20th century, so Newman was the 19th century, Lonergan the 20th century. Lonergan was born in 1904 and in Canada, and died in 1984. A Canadian, as I say, and I met him as a student in Rome. I was in one of his classes there. So both were great men, and both have influenced me immensely, and that's why I'm writing the book. Lonergan, I can talk more about, his effect on me, which was profound. Newman, I always liked Newman. He was a great writer. James Joyce said he was the best writer of English, writer of prose in the English language. So he is a beautiful writer. We were just talking about communications, and heart speaks to heart. That was his motto, cor ad cor loquitur. If you want to speak to the heart, speak from the heart. So anyway, Newman had a great effect on me, and I was teaching in Rome in the early 1980s, and I met the people who were working on his cause for sainthood in the Catholic Church, and they asked me to read 15 of Newman's books, his philosophy and theological books, and that was a great honor. I had already been influenced by Father Lonergan, but to have to read and write reports on these 15 books was just great. And so he became part of my life as Lonergan had been part of my life since I was a student, and doing a doctorate in Rome. So these two, I thought I'd write about. Lonergan called Newman my fundamental mentor and guide, and I wanted to find out why and what that influence was. And so that's what the story of this book has been. It's been great, just tracing what Father Lonergan says about Newman and the effect he had on his life. Maybe the most important thing to say is that Lonergan was a student. He became a Jesuit, entered the Jesuit seminary as a young man, then was sent to England to study. And at the time, he was taught philosophy. It was very scholastic. It was quite medieval, a lot of St. Thomas and so forth. But he didn't get much from the philosophy he was taught. And he just happened to pick up Newman's book called The Grammar of Assent, which is a book about how we make judgments. And how do we know that England is an island? That type of thing. How do you know that? And can you be sure of that? And so Newman wrote this book called The Grammar of Assent. In other words, how do we come to judgments about truth and reality? And Lonergan read this book by Newman 5 times, 5 or 6 times. He said, I don't know whether it's 5 times or 6 times, but he said, I read the major parts of it again and again, and it changed his life. And so Newman was his fundamental mentor and guide, and then he went on to be influenced by Plato and Augustine, and finally St. Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle and the whole scholastic tradition. So anyway, that's my book. Anyway, it's been a labor of love. I've enjoyed doing it, although right now I'm putting the finishing touches on it, so I have to get the footnotes right and that type of thing and do all the editing. But it's been a great thing. It's kept me going, and I've enjoyed doing it very much. So,
well, thank you for telling us about it. It's wonderful. Congratulations on nearing the end, and best wishes for a smooth publication process. And I really appreciate your Heart Speaks to Heart theme that you're pulling from these authors. And hearts grow and change over time. So you made some references to your schooling in Rome. Can we go back even further? Could you tell us about Monsignor Liddy before he was Monsignor? What was Dick Liddy like as a child?
Well, I grew up about 2 miles from here in West Orange. I now live in Xavier Hall dormitory. I'm on the 5th floor, and I have a room that looks out toward West Orange. And I grew up on Hillside Avenue, so I love the view. The view is great, and even I worked in a quarry up in South Orange, so I can see the cliff there where the quarry was. So, yeah, I grew up in West Orange, went to Our Lady of the Valley School here, not too far. Seton Hall Prep, 1950. When did I come to the prep? 1952, I guess, and graduated in 56 and went to the college in 56, and then entered the seminary. And yeah, I love being from this area. I guess my father was a football coach, so I remember growing up in West Orange and playing football and coming home with my shirt all ripped and my mother saying, but anyway, yeah, and playing baseball too. I remember the first time I caught a fly ball. That really sticks in my mind. And so it's become important to me to tell our story, to remember where you're from and what were the moments that changed your life. So anyway, a big point was entering the seminary. I went, at that time the seminary was up in Darlington, up in Mahwah, before it came to the campus at Seton Hall. And I had philosophy there, and I probably had philosophy a lot like Father Lonergan had in England, and didn't really get that much from it. And I learned a little bit about Aquinas and Augustine and so forth. But I was struggling with my vocation to the priesthood at that point. And so the summer of 1960, I was home in West Orange, and I got a phone call. It was Archbishop Thomas Boland, a very kind man, and he said, "We want you to study in Rome." I said, "Well, that's something I can't refuse." So I went to Rome for 4 years, and that's where I met Father Lonergan. I met him in the classroom. There were 600 of us in the classroom, and the classes were in Latin. He said, he talked about it later, he said they were impossible conditions. But I did listen very carefully to what he was saying. Eventually I learned how to understand what was being said in Latin. And I remember thinking to myself, he's telling me something different than what I learned at home. He's saying something different. So anyway, I was ordained a priest there in Rome and came home in 1964 and went to see the Archbishop about what I'd be doing then. And it was the time of a lot of racial unrest, and I really wanted to be in the city. I really wanted to help, where people were at and where the action was. And the Archbishop said, well, we're thinking of sending you to teach at the seminary. And he said to me, well, what would you like to teach, philosophy or theology? And I said, well, theology, of course. And he said, well, we don't need anybody in theology. So that was really a turning point in my life. And I remember being rather depressed that I was being sent back to Rome. I hadn't been home for 4 years, being sent back to Rome for 3 more years of study. But it was the best thing in my life, looking back. A friend of mine, David Tracy, said to me, well, if you read anything, read Insight, Lonergan's main work on philosophy. Insight, a study of human understanding. So I spent a good part of the next 3 years reading that book in a little room back of the Casa Santa Maria in Rome. And so it changed me eventually. I mean, insight is about the moments when we have these moments of insight and getting to know ourselves and getting to know judgments, for example, of what Newman talked about. In other words, how do we know that England is an island? What goes into that? Maybe it did take you didn't take a rowboat around in England, but you might have gone over it in a plane, and that verified by all the maps you've ever seen. But you're certain that England's an island. So Lonergan talks about this process of seeing and then moving to questioning and then moving to understanding and then many acts of understanding and then finally saying, hey, you know what? England is an island, I'm sure of that. And so the process, and then also making decisions eventually, and decisions sometimes that affect, what you understand, like my decision to go back to Rome changed my life. And so that was a great thing. I mean, there were other things that happened to me at the time, but that was, and very important things, people I met and so forth. But as far as the academic world, Lonergan's philosophy is held up, as far as I can see, in just so many different ways that for me it's as sure as England is an island. I should be the same example all the time. So anyway, that's where Lonergan had this tremendous effect on me. And so I come from West Orange and end up reading Lonergan's Insight in Rome, and he talks about it as a moment of startling strangeness. So I wrote a book called Startling Strangeness about reading Insight. It's sort of like a companion to Insight.
I'm super interested in the biographical stuff, but you're making me think, so please forgive a more philosophical question.
Sure.
But if insight is the basic metaphor for knowing, and sight is distanced, that you have to see things from a distance. We were talking before about heart speaking to heart. I think of heart more as a feeling rather than sight, which is maybe more objective and, as I mentioned, distanced. Do you have ideas about what Lonergan thinks about hearts?
Well, there's a priest he passed away about a year ago in Marquette in Wisconsin, who wrote a lot about the knowledge of the heart, and he calls it psychic conversion. And Lonergan liked his stuff very much, that affective conversion. And we're all involved in it all the time. How do you grow in love? how do you grow in love? I mean, um, probably a lot of insights involved in that, and a lot of judgments, yeah, that's a very good question. And matter of fact, Lonergan would, the other part where you talked about sight, that in a lot of ways Lonergan said, understanding is it's not a look. Understanding is not looking at things. We look at things all the time, but understanding is asking questions and then saying, that's it, and a lot of times we're wrong. He says insights are a dime a dozen, and most of them are wrong. It's a little thing that people put on their refrigerator, and it's a quote from Lonergan. Insights are a dime a dozen, and most of them are wrong. So you need good judgment also, and then hopefully good decisions. So I hope that the heart is so important. I'm thinking of your field of communications, and in method and theology, there's several sections. There's a section on carriers of meaning, things that carry meaning, and one of the first of them is other people, intersubjectivity, and symbols. You give your wife a ring or bouquet of flowers or whatever. Symbols are so important, and of course, in the world of religion, symbols are very important. So, and then we talk. We do talk. We do speak. But he has several sections on communications in Insight, and of course, Method and Theology, which you've read, has sections on communication. And they're not easy sections, but they can be tough. But those are the kind of things I've found that reading in a group and group discussion to say, oh, I know, I have a sense of what that's about.
Right.
So anyway.
Yeah, Method and Theology is the only book that I've read from Lonergan. Yeah. And in case anybody doesn't know, it's this thick, so it takes a lot of work. And then, yes, the carriers of meaning stuff is fantastic because people carry meaning.
That's
and
right.
so many communication people think that it's all about words and symbolism, and it's like, it's not that you ignore those things, they are meaningful, but I think you have to have a person first to be speaking, and a person speaking from the heart.
Yeah.
And then for the chapter structure, communications with the S on the end for Lonergan ends up being like a profession where you're communicating out from other professions, such as the theologians studying the Bible, and then communicating what they've learned to everybody else. So when I first met that part, I felt a little diminished that the only job is kind of publication, but when I spend more time with it, I see the theory of meaning in there as very rich and something that acknowledges that communication is much more than transmission. It's transmission matters, but there's so much more. Let's come back to you a little bit. So you told us about your schooling, and then eventually you became a professor here. Could you tell us a little bit about your career at Seton Hall?
Well, let's see. I came back and taught at the seminary at Darlington for a number of years, and then in 1980, Father Charlie Murphy, who was the rector of the North American College in Rome, asked me to go back to Rome for 4 more years, which I did. I was at the North American College, which is the seminary for American seminarians studying to be priests in Rome. And then I came back in 1984. My father passed away that summer in June, and I was still a member of the seminary faculty, and the seminary at that point came down here to Seton Hall. So I lived over at St. Andrews for a year, and then became the rector of the seminary in 1985, Immaculate Conception Seminary on campus here at Seton Hall. And so I remained there until 1990, and then I became the acting chancellor. it was an in-between time president of Seton Hall, and I became the acting, they called it chancellor at that time, for 6 months. So that was interesting. I went to a lot of, different than reading Lonergan or reading Newman. It was a lot of dinners and chicken dinners and shaking hands with everybody. And then I became a member of the Religious Studies Department. So from 1990 up until I retired a couple of years ago, I was a member of the Religious Studies Department and enjoyed that very much. I was a faculty member, part of the committees, part of search committees and different things on the university. And I was chaplain of the basketball team for a couple of years, before the great Father Dennehy became chaplain. So anyway, it's been a good life.
Well, of course, that's when I encountered you.
Yes,
I joined Seton Hall in 2001, and I was part of the College of Arts and Sciences, so I remember you from the faculty meetings. And then somewhere in the early 2000s...
Dynamic faculty meetings.
Yes, dynamic, large faculty meetings. At least they weren't in Latin, but they were definitely large meetings.
They sometimes could have been.
You mentioned committees, though, and the committee that I worked with you on was the design team for what became Core 1101, the Journey of Transformation course, which now in 2025 it's foundational. It's all established, and there's a whole unit to support it, and a regular cadre of faculty teaching it. But way back then, it was just an idea, and you were one of our key idea leaders. At least in my memory, you were. Could you tell us a little bit about how the Corps came to be and how you came to be connected with it?
Well, I can't tell you about every meeting.
Yeah, I know that.
But I can tell you this moment that I remember, a moment that sticks in my mind. Fundamental to both Cardinal Newman, who might be named a doctor of the church, by the way, soon by the Pope, because the American bishops want that and the English bishops. But fundamental to Newman and to Father Lonergan is this notion of transformation, of human transformation, that we're all being loved into changing our lives and to making our lives better, religiously, morally, intellectually. So the notion of transformation is really key to both of those figures, and it's key to life. If you're in a rut, I'm sure the Lord wants you to get out of the rut. I'm sure He wants to, bring you alive and love you and make your life worth living and so forth. So I remember that being at a meeting, and we were saying, well, what is the first year? We'll give them some basic texts in culture, and especially the Catholic intellectual tradition, Augustine and Dante, and even a little bit of philosophy if we can, And I remember after a long discussion, someone wrote on the board, Journey of Transformation. I'm saying, I'm not going to say a word because I don't want to prejudice anybody against this, but I hope this makes it. And it did make it. It was a great name for the great texts, for the great readings, the poetry, some novels, The Death of Ivan Ilyich, Dostoevsky, and or is that Tolstoy? That's Tolstoy, I think. Anyway, but just great readings that touch the heart as well as the mind. And so that was, I remember that from all those long meetings. And faculty meetings can be something because we're coming from so many different directions. And we've all had different backgrounds, and we've studied in different places and studied different things. And today, it's just the world is so complex and immense, and how to pull some themes out of all that that touch the heart, you know. So anyway, the journey of transformation. I love the title.
Yeah, I do too. You know, when I got here, it just was another committee and another job, and then over time, it's become one of the courses that I love to teach the most. And then the comment you made about faculty diversity, so many different people trying to come to an agreement on what every student should read, and it was major challenges. So I don't quite remember the chalk on the board, but I do remember being very happy when we ended up voting on Journey of Transformation, because the prior leader for the course title, you might recall, or really the whole system, was going to be the Odyssey courses. It was going to be built around a Homeric journey with a lot of violence.
That's interesting.
And then thankfully we landed on something that seems much more spiritual, much more Catholic. And so the transformation theme was very welcome. And then you mentioned before with Lonergan the importance of questions. And so deciding which questions should be asking, and then maybe re-asking which questions to focus our education on. So, at least on behalf of myself, thank you for all of your leadership forming the core. You helped design a class that I love to teach.
Yeah, I love to hear about it too. I love to hear so.
Well, we're coming into our last 3 minutes now, so I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned retiring 2 years ago. That's got to be a big step, stepping out of full-time teaching and leadership type positions. Like you mentioned, you were even chancellor for a while. Can you please tell us a little bit about what it's like to retire?
Well, I guess the image that pops into my mind is I lived with my sister when and COVID was happening and all that last few years, but because I had this project in mind to do Lonergan on Newman, I spent the last few years working on this book, and so my image is of sitting by the window in the front of my sister's house on a sunny day, but with snow outside, and the sun coming in, and reading Lonergan and Newman and writing this book. So it's just an image of doing what you want to do and having the time to do it, and couldn't be given a better gift than that, So anyway, John, I'm happy to be with you, and happy to have these ideas and memories to be evoked.
Well, I think for every scholar, it's some kind of dream to have time to be writing and reading, and reading, as you just said, what you want to write, what you want to read, rather than what you might have to do to earn a living or to advance an institution. And so it's not out yet, but I'm looking forward to the book very much. And,
say a prayer for the publisher.
Yeah, and who knows, maybe once it's out, we could plan another one of these podcasts to try to talk about the book in more detail and publicize it. So as we come into our last minute, I hope everybody agrees that this conversation has been a real pleasure. And Monsignor Liddy, thank you so much for being our guest today, sharing some of your history and, of course, the news of your new book. And again, my name is Jon Radwan, and I direct the Institute for Communication and Religion here at Seton Hall University. I'd like to invite all of you to access our Podbean channel. That's where we have most of these podcasts, and where this one will go up. It's very easy to find if you go to Podbean and search for Institute for Communication and Religion. But if you want the whole address, it's just take the spaces out. So Institute for Communication and Religion, no spaces, .podbean.com. If you check it out, you can listen and learn from all of our wonderful guests. So until next time, this is Jon Radwan thanking you for listening.